Welcome, everybody, to the Keeping Score podcast presented by Corbin Motors here in Kalispell. This week, we have a special edition of the Keeping Score podcast where we're highlighting the Glacier Wolfpack football team. They've made it back to the state championship for the second year in a row, but this time they're hoping for different results where they host that trophy at the end of the season. I sat down with Coach Grady Bennett to talk about what went right in their matchup last week with Gallatin and what he can expect this week in their matchup with Helena Capital, a team that they lost to back in week 6. Let's take a listen on what Coach Bennett had to say about the last game and what he can expect this week for the championship. I'm here with Glacier Wolfpack's Coach Grady Bennett. Grady, thank you for joining me. Before we get into what to expect this Friday, I want to go into what happened over the weekend or on Friday. Snowy, cold conditions. Your team in the second half looked like a completely different team, came out on fire. Did the conditions play a factor in that game at all, or was the game plan executed perfectly?
You know, it's funny, a lot of people, they saw the forecast that Bozeman was going to be 3 inches of snow, and a lot of people started asking me, hey, how's your California QB going to handle the snow this Friday night? And just knowing Jackson now for a couple of years, I said he's going to handle it just fine. So we knew that just from practicing and from the type of kid he is mentally, rain, snow, wind, whatever, Jackson's fine. He can throw the ball. Mentally, it doesn't affect him whatsoever. And so we stayed with our game plan. And actually, when they packed the box and went cover 0, men press against our receivers, to me, it just here we go. I mean, that's what we want. We dream for that kind of a matchup to let our receivers have press man with a quarterback like Jackson Presley. So I think it actually favored us the way they decided to play us defensively. It actually favored our offense on that night.
I did see in the stat book that Jackson ran the ball 20 times. Kobe was 19. Was that part of the game plan as well, something you saw in the defense, or was it more about just trying to get different looks for their defense of not being too predictable?
Yeah, I think a combination of both. You know, Jackson's a really talented runner, and we've seen that throughout the year. I think the fans have seen that. We just, by choice, have decided not to run him all year because we really don't need to. We've got Kobe. We've got a great passing game. We haven't been in a situation where we've needed to run him. But all year long, we kind of thought that, you know what, when it comes to this time, semifinals, state championship, if we get there, he can run the ball a little bit. So I think the way they were playing us, packing the box, trying to take away Kobe, the quarterback run was an extra advantage and maybe something they hadn't planned for at all. And Jackson did a great job of running the ball, especially that many times when he hasn't had that many carries. It's different to scramble and run maybe outside the pocket, but to step in and run up inside the A-gap, B-gap, he did a great job with that.
Was that something that kind of opened up more in the second half when you started noticing them being in cover 0, or was that kind of what the plan was all along, or not necessarily a plan or something Jackson was doing all along, or what did that kind of turn in the second half?
You know, I think it was just the fact that they were packing the box trying to take away Kobe so much and not preparing for the quarterback run. Jackson was making great reads on whether to give it to Kobe or keep it. And when he kept it, they just didn't have anybody to account for.
So it was a lot of option runs that he was running.
It was. Okay. And he was making a great read. And, you know, they didn't have somebody assigned to him because it wasn't part of their game plan, part of their expectation. And so, he just did a great job of executing it.
All right, we're going to move on now to the topic that most of the people are tuning in for, the state championship game. You guys are back there. You're playing a team you've already faced earlier in the season, Helena Capital. That was way back in week 6. Seems like an eternity ago. Do you learn anything from that game, or do you kind of scratch that and say we're both different ball clubs now?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, we're both different ball clubs because that's the maturation of both teams and the process, the journey that you go on, and you try to be your best team at the end of the year. And I think both teams are much better. I think for us, though, what's so beautiful about just coming off the Gallatin win and how we won it was exactly what we didn't do the first game in Helena.
Interesting.
So we go up 14-0, should have been 21-0. We dropped the touchdown. Fumble a couple, kind of mess around in the first half. They go boom, boom. All of a sudden it's 14-14. And then we just didn't handle the adversity. It was kind of like, whoa, they grabbed the momentum. We were shell-shocked a little bit. Credit to them. They came out in the second half. And we just didn't respond very well. From that game, this team has learned so much. And I couldn't be more proud. Now think about last Friday night in Gallatin. There's 3 inches of snow. We go up 20-7 into the first half, almost identical. In 5 minutes, boom, boom, it's 20-20. But this time, instead of being phased, worried about that, all that adversity, guys just came out and just kept swinging, just kept fighting, just kept executing. Back and forth in the third period a little bit, ended up 27-27. And then in the fourth quarter, we really established dominance and finished it off. So, I mean, again, when you look back to that first Helena Capital game and how we didn't come through, And then thinking of how far we've come, all the lessons we've learned, put together, and how we did break through on the road in a tough place, tough environment, tough, all those things. To break through like we did, I can't say enough about the guys.
I did notice that Helena Capital's only loss on the season came to the team that you just beat last week. Does that play a factor at all? Do you look at the game tape and see some of the things they did successfully? But that was also week one.
Exactly.
Is that something that you don't think it's prevalent now because of it was so long ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of two things. I think it was so long ago, but also it gives you a little confidence that Gallatin team was a really good football team. You've been watching them on film last week. It was scary preparing for those guys. And so to know that we went down there in those conditions, in their place, undefeated, number one, and knocked them off like that, it gives our kids confidence that, you know what, they beat those. Okay, here we go. But at the same time, I really preach as a coach, I mean, week in, week out, that every Friday night is a unique athletic competition. And, man, it's the team that shows up, plays the best on that given night. It doesn't matter. All the other stuff, throw it out. I think so many times we as sports fans want to put all those other things into it, but it really comes down to just that Friday night and who plays best on any given competitive situation.
You kind of spoke about the last time you played Helena Capital. You start out with the lead and things kind of unraveled. How do you prevent that from happening this time? Is it more just about clean football, or is it more about not letting the moment be too big for the team?
Yeah, I think both. And I think that's what we've learned when I talked about how they reacted. I think now what they have confidence in is not so much about matchups and they beat them, all that stuff. But it's more about what did we just experience? How did we just handle incredible adversity in an incredibly adverse environment on the road, all that stuff? How did we just handle that? Okay, well, whatever we face now, we got this. And that's the message that we've been giving them as coaches. And I think the kids, I thought they were beautiful in how they gave that message to each other that night against their competitors when things on both sides were adverse. I thought our guys handled it really, really well.
Speaking of adversity, with you guys coming back to the state championship after being here last year, with a lot of those players still on this team, is there a sense in the locker room like we're ready to get it done this year? Or is it, like you said, it's a week-to-week basis, it's a Friday night basis? None of what happened last year plays into this year.
Well, it definitely is a week-to-week basis for sure. And all those things are stressed. But at the same time, man, those kids, when I ask them, how many of you remember that feeling last year in that state championship game when the game was over in the locker room? I mean, they don't forget, right? And the whole year for 365 days, their goal has been to get back to this night and break through. That's been our season theme, is breakthrough. We've been there a lot, but we haven't broken through as much as we want to. And so these guys set their goal. They set that as their season theme, which made me really proud, is, man, let's get back there and let's break through and get it done.
To kind of pick your brain as the head coach, from what I saw, Helena Capital was pretty successful with their dual threat quarterback last night, just like Jackson was last week. How are you guys going to be more prepared to kind of limit what he's able to do? Is it more just about getting that pressure with your D line? Is it about quarterback contain? How are you going to keep Mihalis, right? That's how, right?
Yeah.
How are you going to keep him contained to keep your defense and just stay their zones and read the right read?
Yeah, for sure. We've already talked, offensively, we just have to be clean. If we execute and take care of the ball, last time we had 3 turnovers, we had 7 drops. I mean, we do that, you're not going to beat anybody, especially Helena Capital. Helena Capital is a team that you have to beat them. They won't beat themselves. That's just how they're coached. They're so disciplined. They're so well coached across the board. You have to go beat them. So offensively, we have to play clean. But like you just said, on defense, we were not good at all against their option. And they made us look pretty bad. We didn't assign, we didn't align correctly, and they made us look pretty silly, especially Mihalis. He was good, and he's had a great year. He was great last year, but he's improved so much, and he's a true dual threat. He's a college athlete. He's going to play for the Montana Grizzlies. So we've worked hard on it since then. We've gotten to see it a few times against other teams, and I think we are much more prepared now to make sure we are assigned on that dive, assigned on that quarterback, assigned on that pitch, every single play, no matter what look they give us, what formation. We've got our guys assigned. So that's how we have to do, just fit well, just align right, assign right. Our guys have gotten better at that all year, fit well. And then, of course, it comes down to just making plays, right? Now you got to tackle him. You got to get him down. But that's where I think you get some confidence. Last week, first half against two of probably the toughest kids in the state. Well, they are the toughest to tackle, the Dalkey twins. We struggled a little bit early, let them make some big plays and get loose. But in the second half, we really buttoned it down, started to make those tackles, started to get more guys to the ball. So hopefully that gives us confidence as well to tackle the great athletes that Capital has.
Last week, you had the 3 inches of snow. I've been trying to figure out where the game is going to be held. It seems like it's kind of in two different places sometimes. Is there going to be any weather factor going into this week?
It looks like it's going to be played at Vigilante Stadium no matter what. They're the only grass field in the state, and they love that as an advantage for them. But we practice on grass. I know a lot of teams now in the state practice on turf every day because they have it and they play on it and they practice on it. But we practice on grass every day. So, yeah, we do get to play on turf most of our games now. But we practice on grass every single day of the whole year. And so, we're used to it. It's not really a factor for us. It's going to be a Vigilante. I think it's supposed to rain and or snow. It might be very similar to last week. For me as an offensive coach, that's an advantage. Because the defense, I always loved when I playing in the snow, just like the conditions last week, because offensively, you know where you're going. They don't.
Yeah.
So it's a huge advantage for the offense. So I'm excited for whatever the conditions are. It helps us offensively. Now, our defense is going to obviously have to react, but they did well last week. So, it's that same cat and mouse. So it's just a good position to be in where you're not worried about the conditions. We've seen that our kids can handle it. They handle it well. So it's like, yeah, whatever. Let's go.
Last question I have for you. What is the environment like in the locker room? Do you see any sort of nervousness? Do you see any sort of excitement? Or do you see more like redemption that we're back to where we want to be? We want to get it done this time.
Yeah, I would more describe it as the redemption. We're back where we want to be. We're back where we set our goal 365 days. Let's finish it, man. Let's break through. But also, we work really hard on it. The mental aspect. I, as a head coach, work so hard on trying to allow these guys to play free. I think there's a lot of reasons why athletes struggle to play freely. There's so many pressures and stresses and all these things that you can bring into it, which really just make it miserable. And I work really hard all year long, all season long as we go, to try to let them just be able to go out there and just play freely, man, and let it fly. And that was kind of our theme last week. They went and did it beautifully. I was so proud of them. And so, man, it's repeat now. Same thing this week. You've gotten to this point. Now we'll let it go fly. And that's going to be my message to them. Just let it rip.
All right. Any last things you want to say to the people listening or the people watching?
Well, just thanks all year for incredible support. The stands were packed most of our games. I really, really appreciate that. And thank you. And I know a lot of you will be making the trip to Helena, and hopefully the Wolfpack will go get a state championship for all of you. But thank you for your support.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Keeping Score podcast. You just heard from Coach Bennett. We also had a special guest this weekend. This is Jon Allen, sports reporter here at the Daily Interlake, just like myself. So, Jon, we're going to talk about a little bit what happened last Friday against Gallatin. Snowy, cold conditions. What went right for Glacier in that game?
Well, first off, the conditions. I think that's perfect football weather, especially in Montana for this time of year. Nice November day with some snow. What went right for Glacier? They were able to, first and foremost, easily outperform Gallatin in the conditions. I think that Jackson Presley settled into the conditions nicely in the backfield. And so did Kobe Dorchis, honestly, out of the running, on that first drive for Glacier. They were able to bust off a nice 55-yard run with Dorchis. Jackson Presley able to take it in. So they looked comfortable from the start. Meanwhile, Gallatin, they settled in after a drive or two, but they forced a couple of 3-and-outs. They settled in later on and started to get Glacier out of their element a little bit. Home field advantage, you kind of expect that to happen. So I think the biggest thing is Glacier went into halftime, came out a rejuvenated team, especially in that fourth quarter, and played a way that, against a difficult opponent that they might not have earlier in the season, like the first time they played Capital. And maybe if they had played Gallatin earlier in the season, the game might have been a different result. But I know Coach Bennett loves the character of this team. He's talked about that throughout the entire season, and they really showed their character against Gallatin.
Something that Coach Bennett also referred to in the interview that we did is that he believes that those kind of conditions, they favor the offense, but they kind of don't favor the defense. I do want to talk about towards the end of the first half, when Gallatin's kind of seemed like they got their footing. How important was that halftime break to happen for Glacier to kind of regroup and go back out there in the second half where they looked like a completely different team?
I think it could be a good thing and a bad thing for a team that have the halftime break come at that point. For Glacier, it's a great way to just kind of regroup yourselves. You're able to, count your chickens and go out there and put together a game plan to stop what Gallatin was doing right in those last 6 minutes of the second quarter. But at the same time, it's also a break. You kind of get out of your rhythm personally, and you might not be able to restart it. So the offense had been playing well, and they did get shut down 1 or 2 times. But, they came out of the half. Jackson Presley threw an interception. It wasn't the most ideal start to the second half offensively, but the defense stood their ground very well and were able to, allow them to be the first team to score in the second half and then eventually pull away.
We also saw in this game that Presley also ran more attempts than Dortchus did, and Dortchus has been their bell cow back all year. Coach Bennett said that was based off of the option and what Presley's eyes were seeing and him keeping it. But if you actually just look at the stats, Dortchus was more effective with his runs. Do you think he was more effective because of Presley's threat, or do you think that was just all based off of game plan?
I think it's just what this Glacier offense does best, and that's they have so many different weapons all throughout the field. You have Jackson Presley who can throw it, he can run it. You have Dortchus who can bust off a big run. He's ran for 90-plus yards on a carry this year. You have the receivers in Bridger Smith and Cooper Pelk who are deep threats down the field, and you saw all of that in this game. One thing, though, that I'd like to note is that I saw Coach Bennett doing in this game that I hadn't really seen a lot of this year was when they'd shift Kobe Dortchus out of the backfield, they would run design QB runs out of it, and Jackson Presley would just take it up. I don't know if that was a sign of the conditions or if it was something that he saw in the defense. And you mentioned that they were playing cover zero, so there wasn't a lot of deep threat if you could get through that first line. So shifting Dortchus out of the backfield maybe took out that extra player out of the box, something that they liked. It worked to their advantage. That's how they scored their first touchdown of the game. Jackson Presley went untouched from 12 yards out. It worked. So, Dortchus, though, he always finds his footing, and he's always going to be a threat. But, yeah, I think it's just that Glacier can do it through all different aspects of the game on the offensive side of the ball.
Kind of pivoting into now their next opponent for the state championship game that we're all looking forward to. I do want to talk about with how well things went in that second half. Do you carry any of that momentum from that game into the championship game, or does it not matter? That game is off the table now, and now you have to just turn the page and look at the next opponent. Does that momentum in that second half carry over at all?
Yeah, it does, especially putting up 19 straight points to end the game against an undefeated opponent like Gallatin. Exactly. You definitely get a high off of that, and Glacier's definitely going to take that into the next game against Capital. At the same time, though, you can't just rest your laurels on, we knocked off Gallatin, the undefeated team, and now we're into the championship game. We can beat anybody. You still have to go out there. You have to play, and you have to go out there and win. And you're on the road again. You're playing a team that has defeated Glacier already this season. So I think that Glacier's going to get that extra motivation factor to go back out there. And I don't think there's going to be any any hangover from beating Gallatin. But it definitely does give you some good momentum once you're, to end a game on such a run like that.
One of the things that I really liked that Coach Bennett said when we spoke earlier was that after the game, there was not a whole lot of celebration with the Glacier team. It was just, we handled business, but this is not the goal. The goal is to host the trophy at the end. So that, to me, shows a lot of maturity for the team. So going into this game, it's a great matchup. You got Gallatin, who beat Helena Capital. Helena Capital that beat Glacier. Now those two teams are facing each other. Helena Capital beat Glacier way back in Week 6. Do you learn anything from what happened in Week 6 or this late into the season? All that scratch, you start from scratch.
Yes and no. I think it kind of goes into everything we talked about with the momentum and everything. Yes, you're going to take things that you learned from that game. You're going to know what style of offense that they run. You're going to see maybe some of the wrinkles into their offense that you might not have seen on film because you got to match up against it for 60-plus plays. That being said, the team is going to be different. Like you said, it was Week 6, and now you're into the 12th game of the season. So there's new things that they've worked on. They're more in form than they were potentially in Week 6. So it's going to be like a brand new game. I think Glacier's going to have to play their best football. It's not a think. I know Glacier's going to have to play their best football if they want to beat Capital. But with how this Glacier team has been playing, anything is possible.
We talk so much in sports about momentum and how you learn from your mistakes. Helena Capital beat Glacier. Granted, it was Week 6. It was a long time ago. But do we think that the team that lost in Glacier learns more from that experience, or the team that won in Helena Capital is more experienced to do the same and beat Glacier again?
Yeah, I think that, Glacier's had experiences where they've lost games before and had that, revenge game or redemption game. I know Coach Bennett doesn't like to use the revenge aspect of it to fire up his team. But it does kind of play into there. You lose to a team, you get a chip on your shoulder, and this Glacier team's played like they've had a chip on their shoulder since they lost to Capital that first time. So I think that in a way benefits them, that they've had that disappointment in a loss, especially to the team that they're going up against this weekend, and that powers them to kind of want to go out there and get the win more. Meanwhile, Helena Capital, you're coming into this game, you know that you can beat Glacier. You know what you did right. You know what you did wrong for a little while because they went behind 14-0 in that game. So what can you do to kind of make sure the right things happen more often and you don't run into that 14-0 deficit right away? So both teams can take something from the first game of winning and losing. It's just how they're going to use it on the any given Friday aspect.
There's an old cliche in sports where it's you learn more from your losses than you do from your wins. So for the sake of Glacier, I'm really hoping that they do learn from their matchup with Helena Capital. Another thing I want to speak about is the 14-0 deficit that you just talked about against Helena Capital. Can Glacier use any of that to work towards their advantage, saying this is what worked well? They obviously know that they had some miscues in the second half that allowed Helena Capital to come back. Or do you think it's more of a factor of taking what Gallatin used to beat Helena Capital, or is it a combination of all of those things?
I think one of the biggest things that Coach Bennett is going to use this week to kind of help motivate the team is taking film from that first game against Capital and how they performed at the start, and then just how they kind of responded when Capital scored 2 touchdowns late in the first quarter. And I know he talked about this. It's that resolve that they showed in the game against Gallatin this last weekend, where they got into that same situation. Gallatin got 2 late touchdowns in the first half. They tied the game up. But Glacier came out. They were the first team to score in the second half. The defense played well throughout the entirety of the half. They only gave up 7 points in that. And they played just completely different. They played like a team that had experience in that situation and didn't want that failure to happen again. And I think that only bodes well for them coming into this game, because now you could see yourself in the same situation. You're not going to instantly think, oh, well, we were down to these guys before. This game's over, or we've been up, we can win it, and we know we can come back when they punch us in the face. So they have a plan. They know what they need to do, and they can execute it.
Helena Capital has not lost since week 1. Glacier has not lost since week 6. What gives this weekend? And do you think that Glacier being in this spot last year, not getting it done, does that help them at all? And what do you think gives? Do you think Glacier comes out on top, or Helena Capital is just too much for Glacier to handle? Kind of putting you on the spot here, but
it's definitely going to be one heck of a game. Both teams have their flaws. Both teams have their strengths. It's going to be just more about who can come out and execute from the start. This game, we've talked about it before. We'll always talk about it. Coach Bennett will always talk about it. In football, it's all about what happens on that week. Anybody can have a bad week. Anybody can have a great week. And so you can never fully predict what's going to happen on the football field. Weather could play a factor. We had the snow last week. We potentially have snow. We could have rain. We could have no weather at all this weekend. So it's November in Montana. That being said, I do think that, Glacier has the talent to go out there and win this game. They've shown that they can put up points against Capital. They now have this resolve from the game against Gallatin of where they had a similar situation. They were able to prevail. So I do think Glacier goes out there. I think that they get off to a good start against Capital, and I do think that they bring home that state championship trophy.
Well, let's hope that Jon is correct. I know all of us here in the Kalispell and Valley area are rooting for the Wolfpack to bring this championship home. I want to thank my guest, Jon Allen, for joining me this week. And thank you to Coach Bennett for taking the time at a very busy week to sit down with me and do an interview. This has been the Keeping Score podcast. I want to thank my sponsor, Corwin Motors, for sponsoring us. Good luck to the Glacier Wolfpack over the weekend. Thanks again to Coach Bennett and Jon Allen. We'll see you all next time on the Keeping Score. Thanks to Corwin Motors for sponsoring the Keeping Score podcast. At Corwin Motors, they're proud to be family-driven for over 100 years. Their commitment goes beyond selling cars. They're dedicated to serving our community and providing you with the highest quality vehicles to fit your lifestyle. Whether you're searching for reliability, style, or comfort, they got you covered. They understand that you rely on their website for accurate and up-to-date information, and it's their promise to deliver relevant, detailed content that meets your needs. So if you're in the market for a new Chevrolet or just want to learn more, visit CorwinMotorsKalispell.com.